Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about inner work. We live in a culture that's almost completely focused on outer work, on our jobs, where we live, how our body looks, how we choose to spend our time, and who we spend our time with. I know for myself, I spent the first half of my life trying to fix the outside so that the inside would feel better. If I could just find the right job, get the right guy, and lose the right amount of weight, then everything would be okay, right? And I was pretty dedicated to this self-fixing process. Went from guy to guy, job to job, gained and lost hundreds of pounds. And it was both confusing and disappointing when I occasionally had the right guy, looked great in my size 6, and maybe even had a job I liked for a little while. And I still had a deep, nagging lack of fulfillment and a kind of existential unhappiness. And I would continually come back to the question, what's wrong with me? There's so much suffering in the world. I don't even have a right to have suffering. I should be happy, shouldn't I? My existential unhappiness plagued me deeply, drove me into addiction, trying to medicate my own suffering with drugs and alcohol and those outward pursuits, particularly trying to manage the way my body looked in relationships, drove me to a lot of relational and sexual dysfunction and a really intense eating disorder with bulimia and compulsive overeating and occasionally starving myself. Because I really believed if I could fix the outside, then the inside would feel better. It was certainly the messaging that I had received, but try as I might, it didn't work. That my outward circumstances and my inner experience did not match each other. And a series of circumstances happened in my life, and I was introduced to spiritual practice, therapy, and personal growth work. And this was a different paradigm. And I was told, life is an inside job. That if we take care of our inner circumstances, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically, relationally, that our outer circumstances will take care of themselves. And that has been my experience. The paradigm shift from outer work to inner work for me has been the pivot from focusing primarily on what's happening externally and trying to change my job, my relationship, or my body first, and to look inside. I didn't even know internal change was possible. I certainly didn't see it modeled in my family or most of the friends I grew up with. But when I opened myself to grow and evolve, to clear away the wreckage of the past, to be fully present, to start to live by principles rather than acquisition, my entire life experience changed. And the circumstances changed with it. The universe, the life force, the way life is structured is always pushing us to grow. In fact, I think that's what suffering is about. It's information that something needs attention. Concurrently, joy pulls us forward toward our heart's desires, toward what will genuinely fulfill us and make us happy. But we have to pay attention. And it's not a guarantee. We have free will. In fact, the circumstances of our life, particularly in adulthood, are not a coincidence. Whether we're consciously aware of it or not, we have made 1,000 million choices which have brought us to where we are at this moment. And that isn't to blame or shame us, but when we can really take responsibility for those choices, become curious about them, and become aware of the level of power we really have in our life to create our own reality, both internally and externally, it leads us to the infinite possibilities of inner work. Once we're born, there's only one thing we all have in common. We're going to die. What happens in between our birth and our death is time. It's really all we have here. And how we choose to spend that time, that determines the quality of our life. And although there may be really seemingly solid structures of culture, of religion, of family, of obligation, of material and financial responsibilities, I'm going to tell you that every one of those things is a construct, and any one of those can be deconstructed if we have the willingness, the open-mindedness, the courage, and the strength and the support to change. Not too long ago, I returned to my hometown of Weymouth, Massachusetts, It's a suburb just south of Boston. And I drove by the house we used to party in when I was a teenager. And I slowed down, and my old friend Brian was there getting into a ratty pickup truck. And I swear to God, I saw him lean over and puke in the bushes as I drove by. It was 8:15 in the morning. I didn't stop, and I queried around with a couple of other friends and come to find out that 3 of the guys that I used to drink and get high with live in that house, and they're all crackheads. And Brian was having his morning puke because he's an alcoholic. And they're basically doing the same thing in the same place that we were literally doing 40 years ago. And I'm so grateful that I had so much suffering, I couldn't stand it, because change is not guaranteed. How I got to escape and why they didn't, that's a whole other podcast. And I can't say I have the answers to that, but I do know that I'm grateful. And because of the change I've experienced in my life, I know it's possible for all of us. Being stuck is an illusion. Life is a verb. Everything is constantly in motion. There is no stasis in the universe. And if I'm stuck, I am resisting my own life flow. And again, this isn't about shame or blame. It's about taking self-responsibility, being willing to turn my gaze inward, to gather the resources needed to step back into the flow of my own evolution. And I can do that at any time. No age or stage requirements. So we have a very limited idea of what it means to be a person. We tend to see ourselves as a little isolated unit that doesn't change, rather than a living, evolving organism in a larger, living, evolving system. And the larger system has our highest good in mind, because the health of the individual parts supports the health of the whole system. And the human psyche, the human body, the human spirit is incredibly plastic, pliable. It's alive, constantly able to heal and reform itself. And the response time is pretty quick. If I lift weights today, my muscles will begin to change immediately. If I begin to think differently, feel differently, change my belief structures about what's possible, the change begins immediately. Now, it may take a while for it to actually translate into experiential change. I see the idea of inner work very much as if a person is a house. And I love this metaphor because I was a housekeeper for a really long time. And I have really come to see that we can look actually at our living environment and it will tell us a lot about ourselves that we might be unconscious about. So if we think about our body, mind, spirit complex, our healthy ego structure, like a house that we move around the world in, just like there's a lot we can do to change and improve the quality of our home, there's a lot we can do mentally, emotionally, spiritually within ourselves. So being an ex-cleaning person, one of the first things we need to do if we want our proverbial home to be more homey is to see if it needs cleaning. And one of the most effective things we can do as we begin the process of inner work is internal cleaning. Therapy work, good spiritual practice, effective personal growth work needs to include internal house cleaning. Am I dragging around boxes of old drama, trauma, wounding from childhood? Do I have unresolved anger and resentments, fears that don't serve me anymore? When was the last time I went into my closets, into my basement or attic, into that extra room filled with stuff that I keep the door shut on, and sorted through my emotional baggage, my old ideas that might be outworn? I come from some very serious hoarding on my father's side. When I was cleaning out my grandmother's apartment after she passed away, it was floor to ceiling with boxes. There were pathways you could walk to get to the bathroom and the kitchen and the bed. And half the bed itself was even covered with stuff. It was pretty intense. When you come from serious crazy, it makes you a really good therapist. Anyway, I came on 2 boxes that were filled with expired coupons. And in marker outside the boxes, it said expired coupons. Someone had packed them, labeled them, and moved them. And these weren't little boxes. These were like 2 by 2 by 2 boxes. Talk about not being able to let your shit go. And it was a metaphor. I had a client who recently tried to kill himself. And right after he took the bottle of pills, he said, "This isn't what I want to do." And he didn't die. And he ended up calling me. And he's a super high functioning person. But he has tremendous trauma in childhood. And he literally said to me, I have a cabinet full of stuff and it's time to clear it out. I've been able to keep that cabinet shut, but it's going to kill me. And tragically, many people feel that the only way out is to die. They don't know that inner work is possible, that they can clear out their cabinet. And we started that clearing out process just by him telling me his life story. He said to me, this is terrifying, but it feels really good. So house cleaning has another end as well. I went to a friend's house recently, and she does some spiritual psychology work, so I know about the back end of her life as well. And it's a beautiful apartment. Everything was perfect. And she hired someone else to decorate it for her. Most of the furniture was picked by a stranger. She struggles with tremendous fear and insecurity that she's not good enough. She makes her choices based on how other people perceive her and what she thinks she should do, how she's supposed to be, according to whatever supposed to be manual was handed to her in her life. Nothing in that apartment speaks of who she is as I know her. And as meticulous and perfect as it looks, it's a metaphor for her own struggle with perfectionism and fear of her own unique, quirky, super warm, loving, humorous, and creative self. Inner work has many layers and levels, just like caring for a house. How is our inner world decorated? Are we filled with fear, anger, judgment, outrage? Do we spend most of our time thinking about how we can change the outer world? What's wrong with those people? Or do we decorate our interior with love, compassion, connection, service? Do I think, what can I bring to the situation? Or do I think, what can I get out of this? Do we keep our curtains closed and our doors locked and not let anyone in? Or is it open, light, and airy in our internal home? And we can redecorate, just like we can redecorate our house. In fact, it's an interesting experiment to work with our outer world in this way, to rearrange the furniture, to take all the paintings off the walls or put some up and just clear and move the space around and consider how that makes us feel. If you're a meticulous and anal retentive clean person, throw your underwear on the floor and leave it there for a week. Leave the dirty dishes in the sink. That'll fuck you up. And vice versa. If you're a pig, what would it be like to clean after myself, to care for myself, to arrange my time so that self-care is the most important thing rather than making money? I use this simple system of holding up my hand has 5 fingers and to think about the 5 areas of my life I need to care for myself. And the big 5 are physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and relational or social. How am I caring for myself in those 5 areas? It's a really great way to assess my inner remodel and what wants to be fixed, what needs cleaned, what needs rebuilt in my life. And I can look at, there's no big mystery. We can ask ourselves in each of those areas, how do I feel about this area of my life? What do I want? What do I need? And what do I need to let go of? Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, or socially. And I have pain, discomfort, suffering in any of those areas, it's calling for my attention. And I can choose to ignore it, or I can do the inner work and answer the call. And inner work frequently translates into exchange in my outer world that's more grounded and sustainable than if I just change the external thing and don't do the back end work of clearing out what's generating the dysfunction in the first place. My father, the oldest son of the hoarding grandmother, did not want to be like his parents. He was the first child to go to college, and he wanted to be a millionaire. He believed if he could make enough money, that would make him different than them. And because he never did any inner work, he was baffled that try as he might, he was a dismal failure at business. He died a hoarder in deep debt. One of the last conversations I had with my father, I said, I'm going to go to graduate school to become a therapist. He said, what the hell do you want to do that for? No inner work happening over there. Don't worry. So some people just need some house cleaning and redecoration. Some of us might need a remodel. I did an extensive remodel on the house that I live in now. In fact, there's only 2 walls and a staircase that exist from the original structure. We brought everything down to the studs, new wiring, new plumbing, and we added 1,000 square feet. It was years ago, right? When I was first having my babies, right after I got married, and Again, a powerful metaphor for the expansion of our life into being a family. And I've had to remodel my interior house more than once in my life. It can be very disruptive. Oh, but it's so good when it's done. And it can take time. It can take years to rewire my belief structures, to get new plumbing in how I orient toward flow in my life, what comes in and what goes out. Am I playing too small? Do I need to be bigger in my own life? Take up more of my own space? Or do I need to downsize? Keep it simple. After that huge expansion almost 20 years ago, I have a kid getting ready to go off for college. My marriage has ended. I've downsized into this great little garden room that's a live-work space for me, like a tiny house. I love it. As I've kind of downsized and simplified my outer living space, my inner living space has actually got much more room, time, and space to expand. Sometimes people need to move out and get a whole new house, but we still have stuff we bring with us. I have a friend who lost 100 pounds, left his dead marriage, started a new job. He went from being fat, miserable, and hopeless. He rides his bike 200 miles a week now. He has an awesome relationship with his daughter. In fact, years later, he and the wife are trying to work it out, but from a completely different perspective. In fact, they each have their own apartment, and they're both doing inner work. I know a guy who needs to redo his foundation. The foundation's made out of brick, and it's crumbling, and literally one side of the house is starting to sag. And he's really struggling with the process for a few years now. He gets stuck around the money. He gets stuck around the design. And there are not surprisingly some foundational issues in his own life that are making the reconstruction of the foundation in his house a real challenge. And I love the interactive nature of life that actually by redoing and going through the process of constructing a new foundation, it's bringing these very issues, these foundational issues within himself, right up to the forefront. We live in an interactive universe, and often the external will call us into the internal, just as the internal changes our experience of our outer life. So no one can tell us what inner work needs to be done to bring us to the next level, but there are many helpful how-to and instruction manuals to guide us on the path. It is tremendously helpful to have a guide, a helper, a teacher, a therapist, a spiritual advisor, preferably someone without any attachment or agenda in our own life who only has our highest good in mind. It's my experience that solitary self-appraisal is unwise, and we usually cannot do this work alone, nor are we supposed to. In fact, connecting deeply, honestly, and vulnerably with others is often part of the inner work process. One of my favorite quotes of all time is from Richard Bach, who wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull back in the 1970s. Beautiful book about self-actualization. And he says, "We're never given a dream without also being given the power to make it come true. We may have to work for it, however." Our own desires, dreams, hopes are important information. They are like little living things we need to care for, nourish, and help grow, or they die. Similarly, our pain, our suffering, our despair, and hopelessness also need to be tended to. They need to be healed and transformed. And inner work, in whatever form you choose to pursue it, is a solid path to getting there. So if you want change in your life, turn your attention inward and ask the simple question, what needs to change? You don't need to have the answer, you just need to ask that question. Ask it open-endedly, and the universe will answer because it's always paying attention. I've benefited tremendously from asking for spiritual help. Grant me the courage. Grant me the willingness. Grant me the hope. These are resonances and energies that are available to us if we open ourselves to receive them. And that's where spiritual practice can be invaluable in cultivating strength, will, support, hope, faith, courage, fortitude, whatever we need to allow ourselves to be nourished like food, energetically, emotionally, spiritually, so that we can participate fully and meaningfully in this little slice of time we get here called a human life. Thanks so much for listening. If you like this podcast, consider subscribing or leaving a review, or share it with a friend. I'm offering a free download of the first chapter of my book, Allies and Demons, Working with Spirit for Power and Healing. There's a link in the show notes. Finishing up the final aspects of our first digital course, Introduction to Shamanism. I have more information on that in the coming weeks. I love receiving comments and questions. You can DM me at Open Door Growth on Instagram. And if you'd like to find out how spiritual psychology can benefit you in your life, or learning more about my 3-month mentorship program, shoot me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. Deep gratitude to my supporters on Patreon. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.